So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Raven. So let's start the series. With tobacco vapors emanating from his pipe, Sarutobi Hiruzen sat behind his new old desk. He had not smoked for years. Even though the medic's lungs were maintained healthy by regular healing chakra treatments, he had always detested his habit as the third headmaster. He had always claimed that the tobacco helped him cope with the pressures of his job. He was determined to give it up when he retired, and she had forced him to do so. He had fulfilled his pledge, even though the third headmaster herself could have forgotten. With the hat back on his head and his body behind the desk from which he had believed he had escaped, he was now unretired. This was bad because power is supposed to be passed down through the generations, and it is a sign of problems when the young are replaced by the elderly. It was true that Hyde Ninja Village was facing difficulties. Their triumph over the 9 beasts was the epitome of Pyrrhic, but disaster had been avoided. They would be destroyed in another conflict of this nature. Since they had to demonstrate their strength to avoid the other Kages smelling blood in the water, they would have been crippled if they hadn't been the dominant power prior to the 9 beasts. In order to legally choose a village ruler, he had been confirmed as acting headmaster until the turmoil subsided to some extent. Unfortunately, it appeared more and more likely that he would be reinstated as village chief. The horror of it all made him want to shake his head. This shouldn't be the case. He had previously considered who of his pupils would be the most qualified to take on the role of headmaster, and now he couldn't identify a replacement at all. Some people wanted to be the mantle. Uchiha Fugaku's bid had been extremely audacious. As was customary for the most powerful shinobi clan in Konoha, the man was ambitious. Though the Uchiha were revered by the common people, the other great clans were envious and hated them since he was not really on the level of a Kage. Additionally, the Uchiha already had too much strength, no branch is bigger than the tree. He didn't think Fugaku would prioritize the village's needs over those of his clan. His father had also more subtly suggested Hayashi Hyuga as a candidate. Maybe the Hyuga's heir was a better option. For better or worse, he appeared to have been molded into a living example of that clan's ideals. His devotion to the hamlet was unquestionable, but the strict conservatism left something to be desired. However, the sealing policy alienated too many, and the Uchiha would not allow one of their competitors to outperform them. In actuality, Jiraiya was the most qualified candidate to assume the role. But he wouldn't, particularly not so soon after his surrogate son passed away. The only Sannin who would remain faithful to him would be further alienated if the issue were to be pushed. Although it would take years for Minato to be eligible to hold the title of 6th headmaster, there was no guarantee that he would be fit at that time. No, he had no choice except to reclaim the legacy he had left behind. With the jackals closing in, it was now his duty to protect the Yandame's heritage. Now that everyone is present by my authority as acting headmaster, I call this emergency meeting of the Shinobi Council of Hyde Ninja Village Q to order, he said. The important members of the council's higher body were seated and standing around his office. Due to field obligations or a lack of clarity over succession following 9 beasts, several of the lower-ranking clans were not represented. Notably, the new Nara clan had received the votes of the clan leaders of the Akimichi and Yamanaka clans, hence they were not represented. Naturally, Uchiha Fugaku was present. Hyuga Hideki, who was elderly, had also awoken from his clan compound. Danzu, his former competitor, stood with his one good eye out the window, perhaps already attempting to figure out how to use these events to further his own goals. Only Aburame, Shibi, and Danzu appeared to be totally unaffected by the previous day's events out of everyone in attendance. As you all know, the Yandame with his final act sealed the 9 beasts into an infant in order to defeat it. It was his final wish that the people of this village acknowledge her as a hero. However, the villagers and no small number of shinobi have rejected this and insist on seeing the infant as 9 beasts reborn. They call for her death. This we will not allow. I agree, Sarutobi. The Yondaime has left us a valuable parting gift. Jinchuuriki have always been powerful, and the Nine Beast has never before been contained. We stand to gain control of the very force that nearly brought us to our knees, Danza said. Sarutobi acknowledged this by turning his head slightly. His return to power was partly to reign in the Warhawk, but he doubted that Danza would agree on anything else pertaining to the child. Uncertain friends and moral ambiguities were commonplace in politics, particularly in shinobi politics. Troublesome, people are really stupid enough to not being able to tell the difference between a cup and the water in the cup? The young Nara sighed. The young man appeared to be enduring the leadership role just as well as the majority of Nara. In fact, this constancy made things a little easier for the Sandaime. Is it really possible to contain such power in something so small and weak? If the fox escaped, we would be doomed, Amira asked. The Yondaime was the greatest seal master to ever live. If anyone could do it, he was the one. Jiraiya has also inspected the seal and confirms it to be functioning, replied the Sandaime. Without a doubt, he spoke in the tone of a headmaster who was closing the case. This data confirms my stance. The Aburame will not support the destruction of the vessel until such a time as it presents a clear and present danger to the village. The head of the Aburame clan responded in a completely neutral tone. The recently promoted Inuzuka Alpha did not express a preference. Since that clan had always been better equipped for combat and the field than for politics, his shifting posture suggested indecision. I will not contradict the professional opinion of two geniuses on their craft. The Hyuga clan will oppose any motion for terminating the container until it poses a threat to the village, replied Hyuga Hideki. The elderly shinobi was unreadable after carefully selecting his remarks. Similarly, Uchiha Fugaku expressed his opinions. As it happened, Kohara was the only one who was in favor of ending the baby's life. The issue of what to do with the newborn Jinchuuriki then arose. On this issue, there was no consensus. Fugaku had argued that custody of the container should go to the Uchiha. They were more than competent because they were the strongest clan. To serve as instructors, they may teach the container to be a devoted and lethal shinobi of the leaf, already possessing the strongest force. He asserted that if the container weakened or started to pose a problem, they would be able to swiftly resolve the issue thanks to that same strength. This measure was not endorsed by anyone. The ambition of the Uchiha had long caused them to be distrusted. Giving them additional authority was a recipe for trouble. Hideki offered his clan as a more subdued and reliable choice. The late Yondaime's efforts would be supplemented by their sealing school, which would guarantee perpetual control of the container. To be sure, it was a better proposal. The Uchiha boasts of strength were not as logical as his argument. The Uchiha resisted, correctly interpreting this action as a power grab by their present adversaries. Furthermore, the Sandaime could not permit the youngster who had been declared a hero by his successor to be sold into slavery by the Hyuga. Because of the balance of power, he accepted their seal servitude, but he would not let them to grow as bothersome as the Uchiha. The Nara and the Inuzuka had little interest. Someone who was bound to the demon that killed the prior Alpha and numerous others was unlikely to be accepted by the pack. The Nara described the involvement of clan politics as problematic, but he did not go into detail that would have amounted to a rejection. The Yamanaka and Akimichi clans were overlooked since they were not represented. Danza suggested that the state should be the only entity to use such a powerful weapon. The Sandaime would probably soon have to reinstate his root program in exchange for something. Danza had strong support from the Alpha and his old colleagues. He would not permit this, however, even though his title was merely acting, and the hamlet was still not a democracy. He told them that Jiraiya regarded Yondaime's final request as a legally binding agreement, and that he would cut off his connections with the village if they violated it. It was even accurate. At this point, the Toad Sannin was essential, even though at other times they would have jumped at the chance to condemn Jiraiya. the Aburame Shibi unexpectedly volunteered his clan's assistance with the container issue. Regardless of their choice, he thought, the public would hate the container and target anyone who were near it by association. Unlike other clans, the Aburame would not suffer from such a reaction because they already had a semi-pariah status. Furthermore, the clan was the least likely group to harbor animosity or hold irrational views because they were living hives. Since it appeared that Shibi was genuinely thinking about the child's welfare, the Sandaime was persuaded to agree. However, the youngster would need to turn into a hive in order for such an adoption to occur. Although he thought he was a tolerant man, he did not believe the Yondaime would wish for his child to suffer such a destiny. The others protested, claiming that the procedure would interfere with the sealing or something. Since nobody was making any progress and everyone had urgent matters to attend to, the conversation went on. The Nara provided the final solution. They signed a legally binding contract stating that the container would be considered an orphan and would not be contacted for training or engagements until it had attained ninja training or genin. The ease with which the language of legality might be twisted again was disheartening. No one was able to get what they desired, therefore the concerned parties departed the table. Shortly after, Sarutobi left the office himself, regretting that he had failed to secure his clan's protection for the Yondaime's legacy. However, he wanted to make sure the headmaster hat was safe from the Uchida and other claimants at this time, and it would have been viewed as a political ploy. He moved through the village at a speed that was astounding for a man his age, even as a shinobi. The settlement itself was unharmed, but the residents were clearly showing the effects of the conflict. An energy of rage and restlessness permeated the air. He was fully aware of who would be most vulnerable to the impending storms. He was headed to a secret room in the ANBU headquarters. He finally arrived in a nearly sterile basement room, but even as headmaster, he had to follow protocol while moving around the complex. A cradle of everything was seated between the dog and 3 other ANBU, who were standing on guard inside. The level of security was appropriate given the topic of discussion from last night. He scooped up the sleeping baby with a burst of sunblonde hair on her head after his identity was verified. The Sandaime headmaster groaned. "I did what I could, Naru. I can only hope it will be enough." The girl slept soundly, oblivious to the future that lay ahead of her. As the personification of shinobi, he soared through the treetops as a physical ghost. It would require an expert to know that he had ever been there, and a jonin to see his advancement in the shadows. Thus, before reaching his ultimate objective of consequence, the shinobi traveled to the country of decisions without being noticed by nature. Making decisions is never simple, and shinobi in particular may find them difficult. Shinobi are designed to serve as living weapons and tools, extending the will of their master. If a shinobi receives a command, it must be followed. If a mission is assigned, it must be finished, else, the shinobi will perish. However, a notion is seldom as straightforward as reality. The best shinobi are all thinkers in one way or another. When faced with a dilemma, they have to consider the effects of every option and choose the best one. The great ones made their own decisions, whether they were monsters like Orochimaru or heroes like the Shodaime. Naturally, decisions weren't always the best ones. He thought about the White Fang's disgrace. In order to be protected and to resume a somewhat normal shinobi life, the majority of missing nin would be happy to join another community. However, very few were ever accepted because no village wanted to be perceived as supporting desertion as anything other than a sophisticated form of suicide. This shinobi had to deal with the threat of treachery tonight. There were only 2 possible results. He had a number of options, but they all led to one of 2 destinations. In any case, he would break a deeply cherished trust. He was not a fool. His 2 allegiances would inevitably diverge and clash, and he would always lose something valuable. And the first step in discovering the nature of his betrayal would be tonight. There would be blood, but not much of it would be worthy of being shed. Without lifting a leaf, he fell to the ground and thought one more time. The choice of which dream he would slay at the end of the journey would depend on what he did in the next minute. Since he was exhausted, the newcomer was heard before he was seen. Silently enough, he fell to the woodland floor, but the landing caused leaves to rise all around him, and he dropped his box casually. He was still wearing his ninja training vest, and it was more difficult to read him because of the material covering his face and hair. However, he was exhausted. The strain of running away and avoiding security was already wearing him down more than dread. He observed that his partner had already thrown away his Hittite. The package was examined by the shinobi. Even though it was wrapped in an issue blanket and secured with normal shinobi wire, it was considerably smaller than he had anticipated. So little. "They aren't too far behind, Itachi-sama," said the previously unaccounted for Nin. The Anbu's sword penetrated his heart before another pointless idea occurred to him, so he didn't need to worry. Merciful perhaps, he would not have survived as a missing Nin, Itachi reflected. After committing to his plan, he examined the fresh corpse and took off the temporary mask. He didn't really know the man, but he was a fellow Uchiha. He would never do so now. It's odd that killing family members is essentially the same as killing anybody else. Itachi dropped the deceased man to his own devices and focused on the parcel. Without even bending a knee, he skillfully sliced through the blanket and cut the wire with the dirty sword. He went to one knee to undo the late Uchiha's work after pausing to clean his sword and put it back in its sheath. This blonde girl in a tattered, frayed dress was so tiny, and the drama of the evening had been played out for her. In the spirit art-induced slumber, the container of the 9 beasts no Kitsune appeared so innocent, unaware of the evil that had occurred this evening. In the same way that they probably picked a clothing that wasn't quite a rag for her to wear, no one at the orphanage had probably ever bothered to clip her sun-blonde hair, which was almost as long as she was. The whisker, scars on her cheeks, which marked her as a human sacrifice for all the world to see, were the only thing that revealed her anomalous character. While he grabbed her up and waited for his fellow Anbu to come and pursue the dead man, Itachi remained silent. He felt oddly numb as he held the youngster he was supposed to steal for his family. He hadn't felt that way after his first kill or after losing a buddy for the first time. Detached came as close as she could to describing the emotion, but it did not quite fit. With his decision made, the act was completed and the situation had passed. He felt a tinge of anxiety that this emotion might become his close friend in the days ahead, even though he now recognized that he would be able to follow the road he had chosen tonight. October 12, 7 years after the 9 beasts sealing. Despite appearances, Naru Uzumaki was in a pleasant mood, which was fairly unusual. Even for a girl her age, Naru was little, which deeply annoyed her because it was simply another thing for the other kids to make fun of. However, since Gigi had allowed her to leave the orphanage, she had received far less of that. Although her flat wasn't a palace, it offered her more solitude and space than she had ever experienced in her life. She didn't want to be alone herself, quite the contrary, but it's better to be by yourself than to be surrounded by people who despise you. She had never received any friendly words or assistance from the grown-ups, even though they didn't smack her like they did other misbehaving kids. It was no secret that she received the worst and last of everything, even food and beds. Neither she nor the other orphans knew why the grown-ups detested her, but that didn't stop them from exploiting the situation. That was overly dramatic, but not by much. The orphans' reasoning was straightforward. First, Naru was, for whatever reason, at the bottom of the hierarchy, and second, making fun of her was a simple method to win over the staff. She had experienced bullying and exclusion from her peers along with neglect from her purported caregivers. Instead of giving them the satisfaction of knowing how the words and icy glances cut, she smiled. She accepted the chore punishments and played practical jokes on the other orphans as payback. She didn't care much about clothes, but she wouldn't take hunger lying down, so when she truly needed something better to eat, she stole it. For as long as she could remember, it had been her life, a very strange dance of stealing and practical jokes balanced by punishment and seclusion. She then requested to leave the orphanage when Gigi gave her a choice of gifts for her birthday. After some effort, she was able to secure an apartment, and now had the entire hamlet to explore. She believed that her life had significantly improved, even though her clothing would not admit it. The weather was fantastic, she was full of ramen, and she received her second favorite birthday gift, which is why today was really pleasant. Naru cherished her birthdays. Even back at the orphanage, she had a special day on her birthday to spend with Gigi in the tower, where she could watch the festival from the window and eat as much ramen as she wanted. When she slept at the tower, the bed was likewise much nicer. In addition, that was the only day she received a gift. He used to give her clothing, but this year he realized his mistake and gave her a kunai of her own. Although it was a training kunai, it was so dull that it was more of a blunt item than a deadly weapon. However, to the 7-year-old girl, it was the greatest weapon ever and the secret to rescuing the headmasters, both alive and dead, from the evil Madara and the snake Sannin. By hearing the stories the caregivers told the other kids, she had picked up those names. The stores were equally wonderful second-hand, in contrast to her clothing. Naru could not fully understand her situation as she navigated back alleys that other females would have been rigorously instructed to avoid. She spent her birthdays with the headmaster, for example, because it was the day that someone was most likely to seek revenge on her for something she had not done. For example, if her guardians had not known that Shinobi watched the orphanage to make sure the letter, if not the spirit, of the headmaster's order was followed, they would have either killed her or kept her hidden in a closet her whole life. She was also unaware that the cook had attempted to poison her but had been quickly caught and given a 20-year prison sentence for violating the village chief's order. For the time being, she was unaware that the reason she was able to walk about the town with a certain amount of freedom was because she had been constantly followed by 2 ANBU ever since Uchiha Itachi had thwarted an abduction attempt. The locals were well aware that a number of vigilantes had attempted to harm the girl, but that 2 ANBU trainees had effectively eliminated them. The trainees' attempt to safeguard the container while keeping her unaware of their presence and actions had become a sort of joking test among the ANBU. The week before, a small group of intoxicated individuals and those with reopened wounds marched on her apartment in anticipation of the Day of the Nine Beasts. However, a full-fledged ANBU caught their attention and sent them back to their bottles without even having to hurt them. It was true that a lot of people were upset about the way village resources were being squandered. However, a lot of people also wanted to see the possible investment in the container have time to work out in their favor. Others complied only because breaking the headmaster's rules would undermine the village's foundation. Up until today, the system had operated smoothly. Today, the Uzumaki Naru would be enveloped by Murphy's Law rather than the headmaster's. Mitarashi, Nurta's friend, wasn't feeling well. Of all, this was how she usually felt these days. Even by shinobi standards, her mission had been unpleasant, and a loudmouth had ruined her post-mission dango runs/bender. Insults typically merely bounced off her. This was a habit from her time in the academy. And during the past few years, it has unavoidably become much more powerful. Even in the greatest of circumstances, thinking about him did not help, therefore she stopped that stream of thoughts. For the time being, all she wanted was to go home and sleep off the edge of her senses caused by her inebriation. She was jumping over the roofs of the village. She could not stand the frowns and murmurs of those who could only walk. The villagers detested her just as much without even comprehending what she had gone through, and the contempt of other shinobi may have struck closer to heart, but they were supposed to be suspicious. She was obviously hearing a real call for assistance, even if she was distracted with her own thoughts and her inebriated Nurta friend was still undergoing ninja instruction. That actually confused her for a time because she was used to hearing screams or unintelligible calls for help, but she hardly ever heard someone just exclaim, "Help!" That line of thought was primarily the cause, and she acted quickly when it became clear that the cry appeared to have originated from a youngster. She was led by one Shunshin to the correct roof, where she observed the scene below. She may have been hardened to immorality for a long time, but she still had some form of morality, and the sight made her eyes go cold. 3 peasants, one without an arm, had a girl pinned to the wall in the alley underneath her. While one of his friends chuckled and murmured something she didn't care to catch, the other had a grip around her wrists and was holding her nude body against a brick wall. She recognized a piece of green material in the hand of the one-armed man, who appeared to be the leader, as a torn clothing. He was focused and even exuded murderous intent, in contrast to his 2 delighted friends. After assuming he was a former genin, she concluded it made no difference. Midarashi Naruto's companion chose to play quickly and cruelly since she wasn't in the mood to play. The laughing man offered the best target by removing his trousers, drawing his weapon with a kunai, and then letting him fall while yelling. As the girl hit the ground, the man who was holding her had time to enlarge his eyes. He fell like a bag of grain as she chambered a kick and delivered a deadly blow to his throat. As the girl slumped forward, she caught her and picked her up under her arm. She focused on the lone-armed man who had dropped the dress and drawn a kunai during his free time. He took a clumsy but generally sturdy stance. Yes, he was obviously ex-genin. He yelled, "Back off, snake whore!" After dropping the female, Naruto's pal quickly made hand gestures and let loose her shadow snakes. Once, the one-armed guy yelled and attempted to cut the snake form's spirit art. He then spent the rest of his time agonizingly dying. The kunoichi's face broke into a predatory smile. She had often dreamed about doing that to anyone who dared call her that, and now she had a legitimate reason to fulfill her wish. Unfortunately, a whimper behind her broke her post-homicide euphoria, and she returned her focus to the nude girl. The buddy of Naruto saw the scars on the blonde girl's cheeks and felt a pull at her memories as she got up from the ground and pulled her excessively long hair out of her face. "You dropped me," announced the shrimp. That fell on the no pile of all the things Naruto's companion had been expecting to hear. Before she could express her righteous and indignant rage, the girl saw the corpses and the thug clutching his destroyed crotch, so she did the sensible thing and puked. "I just killed and castrated people in front of a little girl. Could have handled this better, Naruto friend," she grumbled to herself. She took off her ninja training vest and put it over the stooped girl, opting for the obvious quick remedy. She cleaned the girl's face with the back of her hand. Oh no, she knew there was some meaning behind those scars. A friend of Naruto told her, "Well, you're safe now, kid. Let's take you to the hospital, or something." She took the young blonde in her arms and leaped to the rooftops in 3 bounds. The condition of unconsciousness was very different from tranquility. Even in the absence of awareness, the darkness felt murky and ominous. The first sense to return upon the awakening was that of agony, which was like a dissolvent poured over spilled oil. Nevertheless, the pain helped burn away the remaining sluggishness that was cluttering her thinking, and the red spikes of violated nerves were better than the previous state. Ino was blinded by the flood of light that caused her eye to slam shut after snapping open. In the same instant that she became aware that the sun had risen, she found it difficult to remember why that knowledge was so important. Although her mind was working, it was still arthritic trying to piece together what had happened. "Good, you're finally back," a voice that was familiar said softly. Tentatively, she opened her eye and looked around. Probably to help hide her body, she had been lying on a huge tree branch in the middle of the vegetation. Shikamaru appeared to prefer being somewhere else as he leaned against the tree, like he always does. Apparently carrying a cigarette, the special jonin lighted it and took a puff. "Sakura patched you up, says you should be able to fight but advises against it. I suggest you take it slowly and head back," the inflexible user of the shadow said. Ino nodded in acknowledgement of this information, then pushed herself up onto her elbows. Her eyes opened in surprise as she glimpsed beyond the vegetation for the first time. The ninja training muttered, Chica, what happened? Before responding, the slothful shadow manipulator took another suck from his cigar and let out the vapors through his nose. Troublesome, he said, summarizing what had happened that evening. The forest of death abruptly ended less than a kilometer distant in a huge crater, with smoke still billowing into the sky from the caldera's burning dirt. Within dimension 77777777 #apfel, 6 seconds later. The typically Gothic/Japanese castle, the sinister fortress of evil, had seen better days. It now resembled a battlefield. To be fair, though, it had just been a combat zone, so maybe a lack of decor is acceptable, if not anticipated. A handy rag that had formerly been a part of a deceased minion's outfit was used by the Dark Lord of Darkness to wipe the blood from his sword. The ominously tall, dark-clad figure was also a little worse for wear, but he thought he was tough enough to pull off the ragged appearance. He looked at the white-clad corpse of his adversary, the hero, and once again verified that he was indeed dead. You had to exercise caution because these heroes are like roaches flushed down the toilet. You believe they're gone until they creep back up when you're using the john and touch your ass. Nevertheless, he made a note to send his enormous ant-eater to consume the corpse. It's really awful to have it happen to you. He went back to his battle-ravaged evil throne room after gathering his shuriken. Even the ceiling was in ruins, and it was a complete disaster. In a conflict involving martial arts, how can you possibly destroy the ceiling? Not even the throne. With a boarded-up throne room and a fold-out chair, how was he supposed to intimidate people? In any case, he witnessed the conclusion of the conflict between his faithful left-hand lieutenant and his cunning right-hand lieutenant. For once, his loyal lieutenant looked cool thanks to battle damage and shattered pieces that made the typically over-the-top, scary armor and battle mask less ornate and more effective. In an attempt to stop a severe wound, the traitor knelt down and gripped his side. To say that his black clothing was menacing would be an understatement. Even though it seemed suitable, the new white bandana definitely went against the concept. And his distinctive hat was gone. No, it was on the ruin of his throne. How in the world did Grady's hat end up on his throne? The DLD then loomed ominously above the traitor's cliché. Tell me this before I destroy you, Grady. Tell me why you betrayed our empire of evil after so many years of service, my once faithful ninja cowboy. The ninja cowboy flashed his brilliant white teeth and said, My former dark master, I was seduced by their dental plan. The DLD muttered, protecting his eyes from the brilliant light of dental perfection, while striking the face of betrayal in the mouth with the drew backhand. You betrayed us for your teeth. We are villains, we don't do personal hygiene. We are the gross and gritty kind of masculine, the DLD said with rage. There was something particularly sinister about the booming, echoing tone of his voice now. However, in light of aforesaid years of faithful evil service, I shall be merciful. I will behead you and sell your body to the peasants for meat, and convert your skull into a candy dish, the DLD menacingly added. While his commander pretended to draw his sword, the obedient lieutenant pulled Grady to his knees for dramatic effect. At the top of the royal room, a scorching hole appeared in the air as he was about to strike the ninja cowboy. Screaming and straining against 3 red foxtails that were attempting to choke her, Nera plummeted through the opening and disappeared into another hole that was only a few centimeters above the ground. The DLD demanded of no one in particular, What the hell was that? Dark Lord of Darkness, Grady escaped while the Deus Ex Machina distracted us, noted his devoted subordinate. As it turned out, the only thing left where the traitor had been bleeding was a black cowboy hat. In an attempt to relieve tension, the DLD hefted his sheath and struck his loyal lieutenant in the crotch. As his victim folded up and collapsed to the ground, he rubbed his temples. The Dark Lord of Darkness sighed. Of course he did. I hate Mondays. See who's still alive and clean up this mess. I'm going to go lie down now. Being evil didn't appear to pay off on certain days. In order to avoid having to go kill someone, he sincerely prayed that the private bedchamber of evil had survived undamaged. Fast forward. Not as long as the last time we did, but still not a negligible amount of time, and certainly not nearly as long as the skip to the Shippuden era. Tower of Titans. The Titans Tower's main room fulfilled so many purposes that it truly lacked a suitable name. Robin saw it as a command center, while Raven saw it as the social lounge. Regretfully, the vast room fits both characteristics. The room was empty for the time being, and the only light coming from the plexiglass wall that dominated it was the pre-dawn light. A number of green lights flashed on a control panel while different electric high notes played. The heroes had gone home, and authorized entrance had occurred. However, it was evident that they did not return victorious on this particular day when the doors slid open to let them into the room. As usual, Robin was the first to pass the threshold, moving too quickly for a jog but not fast enough for a proper walking step. His objective was the computer across from the couch, which he swiftly accessed to display a profile and an image. The Kid Wonder exuded an almost tangible sense of dissatisfaction, which is perhaps why the majority of his companions hung behind as they followed him. He worked from the dim light of the computer screen, not bothering to switch on the room lights. Raven was leading the way, seemingly unaffected by his attitude, and lagging behind more because he didn't want to keep up. As Raven took a seat next to Robin and watched his work over the shoulder, Cyborg and Beast Boy exchanged glances while observing their leader's attitude and actions. Starfire followed Cyborg inside, but she wasn't sure what to do. She wanted to console Robin, but she knew from experience that he didn't want to be cuddled like a Ziltrak when he was acting this way. Reluctantly, she sat down on the couch with her two allies. After completing the profile update, Robin focused on the photo. Beast Boy pulled on his own hair and yelled after Robin had been passively staring at the unresponsive image for a minute. "Dude, will you stop that? You're acting like you lost your girlfriend or something. Am I wrong or did we just win that fight?" said the Beast Boy. "Truly, Robin, the illegal weapons have been secured and both buyers and sellers captured. Also, the Leaf did not escape with all the money she wanted," Starfire stated. With her final utterance, he dismissed the alien's hand that had drifted from her seat to rest on Robin's shoulder. Under her hood, Raven rolled her eyes. "You ought to have given up when you were ahead of Starfire," Raven said. Starfire looked at her buddy, perplexed as to when she had appeared in public. The lines that his crew could see on his face were often kept for Slade as he moved away from the computer to face them. "We didn't win, not even close. Leaf somehow knew about the deal and got there first. Most of those criminals are in the hospital and 3 men are dead. Leaf remains at large with at least $30,000 in cash. This renegade is piling up bodies in our city and lining her pockets. This makes 3 engagements and 3 losses. She is making us look like fools," replied Robin. Beast Boy protested. "Hey, if it weren't for that whole multiplication trick, we would have had her." Cyborg made the decision to step in on BB's behalf, believing he saw a twitch beneath Robin's mask. "That's the problem. Each time we think we have Leaf, she pulls another ace out of her sleeve and gives us the slip. This duplication power makes her a lot more dangerous. While we were catching that last clone, the real Leaf got away clean. But Robin, man, if not for us, she would have gotten over $1 million, and maybe even the lasers. And next time her purple ass is going down," Cyborg exclaimed. Even Robin appeared a little less agitated after the vote of confidence, as his announcement of an imminent triumph seemed to uplift the atmosphere in the room. "Well, her sleeves can hold many more aces," Raven admitted. At this moment, the screen's dim lighting was replaced with bright morning light as the sun began to peak above the cityscape. Beast Boy grumbled as he thrashed on the couch. "Ah, dudes, I've been up all night, again. This is totally destroying my sleep cycle and mojo. Without my beauty sleep, how am I supposed to please my fangirls? Cyborg yawned and got up to go to his room to rest. Yeah, we should hit the sack before something else happens. We're no good to anyone if we can't keep our eyes open, he said. Starfire pretended to address Robin, only to see him leaving the room already. Beast Boy, for his part, had apparently slept out on the couch in the middle of a flash. Raven shook her head at her friend's antics, thinking it might not be a bad idea to sleep during the day instead of at night. She briefly examined the image before moving back to the computer. Despite being completely hidden from head to foot, the figure was unmistakably female, with only her eyes showing. She wore what Raven could only describe as dark purple ninja robes, complete with gloves and a pullover mask, except for her feet, which were covered in black boots that oddly showed off her toes. She carried one of her trademark throwing knives in each hand, and 2 bags dangled from her belt. Leaf's eyes, a pair of vivid blue eyes with a ring of reddish purple surrounding the iris, were the only distinguishing characteristic. Raven shut down the computer and closed the window, not feeling as fixated as her leader. After putting the renegade vigilante out of her mind, she went to her room to meditate before going to bed. Public restroom in Jump City, approximately at the same time. The smoke poured up from the ceiling, and Neru waved her palm to disperse it. Neru questioned why Pervy Sage, who was such a genius, couldn't have made a ceiling scroll that didn't emit smoke. Neru got up from the toilet and left the stall, putting the scroll with her clothing and loot in her handbag. She always aimed to get at the station in time to mix in with the commuters, but it appeared that her timing was a little off. She said her game was disrupted by the colorblind wonders. She thus waited on the john till someone entered, pausing to study the newcomer. The woman wore a hooker's outfit, but Neru was also wearing one. Investing in a fishnet top and a shade of bra to make people take a second look was something she had learned from her mother. Over that, she wore a black miniskirt and an open, short-sleeved orange jacket. For any ninja, including Kunoichi, hiding in plain sight is the greatest option. Neru made a quick detour at the grocery store to get some fresh instant ramen before heading directly for her flat. Even though Jump was off the beaten path, yes, it was the slums, it felt like home in a way that the more upscale areas couldn't. The fact that poor income and dashed hopes smelt the same wherever you ended yourself was reassuring to her. After all, a girl must have standards, even if they are unsettlingly low, and the building she had moved into was marginally better than its colleagues. As she walked into the lobby, she let her gaze wander over the mailboxes, most of which had broken locks. As she took the Jump Herald from his box and headed for the elevator, she concluded that Mr. Muniz was the lucky one today. In addition to the sound of breathing, footfall, and a noticeable absence of deodorant, the smell of cabbage warned her of the impending confrontation. But she had to give him the benefit of the doubt in order to be true to her character. With one hefty hand, the slumlord grabbed her shoulder and pulled her to face him, announcing his arrival. Midarashi, he snarled. As long as she lived, she doubted she would ever forget his mustache, even though she couldn't speak or recall his name. The gray handlebar was so thick and long that it violated morals and the laws of physics. She questioned how he could put on his undershirt while that object was affixed to her face. Neru was distracted from thinking about facial hair by his next utterance, which seemed to indicate that he was frugal with excessively accented words. Rent, he ordered, reaching into her personal space with one outstretched hand. Neru tilted her head as though she was giving it a lot of thought and put a finger to her chin. Airily, she replied. I'm a few days behind on the living money, aren't I? 3, he said. After searching through her purse, Neru found a fistful of crumpled dollars, which she then dropped into the waiting hand. While he counted, she chose to ramble on. Lucky me, I had a busy night. 3 guys and 2 girls, and I'm telling you one of those girls was almost more than I could handle. The worst tough was this short guy, what an attitude, And no tip, she grumbled. The slum master, pleased with the count, shoved the bills into his pants and stalked off in a different direction. She called after him with a blown kiss. Love you too, Ivan. Whore, he replied without looking back. Neri gave him the finger and continued on her way to her apartment. After spending some time with her mags, she went to bed and had ramen. She worried if she would have to accept that man's offer because she still lacked the necessary funds. After all, this was not her world, and once she left, she would never return. Sacred Ruins, Universe 00000003 Alpha? The city had died. Only the bones of stone remained to writhe in the crimson sun after the city had fallen so long ago. Much had fallen beneath the hard earth, and nature had curved the jagged broken edges. Only wreckage remained after the magnificent arches that had withstood that day collapsed. The carvings that formerly graced every surface vanished into obscurity, and the renowned murals were reduced to dust. Even the Temple of 10,000 Facets, the pride and splendor of a city renowned for its simplicity and humility, had been reduced to a pile of shattered rocks, with its vastness serving as the only reminder of its former splendor. Nevertheless, the stones continued to whisper to anybody who ventured onto hallowed territory. Of lost paradises, of unrealized magnificence, and of dry, sorrowful tears of the eternal conclusion. Few, however, ventured to undertake such efforts because, not so long ago, the horrors of the fall had lingered in every shadow, torturing both living and dead, leaving the world's wound unhealed. Even still, the scar had now lessened, and the only person who had seen what was going to happen slept fearlessly among the temple's rubble. Above the ruins, the sky was torn apart, with flames engulfing the edges as the emptiness opened up to expose a flurry of lights in every possible hue, shape, and dimension. As it finally stopped falling to the ground, the beast flailed and cursed every kami and oni as it descended from the nothingness and chaos. For a little period, the observer pondered whether it had passed away as it lay motionless on the bone dust, its red fur turned to the hue of dried blood. Unfortunately, this idea was disproved as flames erupted again from its back, restoring the beast's hue. At this point, the observer raised an eyebrow as the flames finally twisted and turned into 5 tails. At this point, the beast became conscious and chose to scream into the sky. My tails! That blasted kit! I will eat her for this! Grah! It roared as its remaining tails flailed. White fire ascended to strike the sunrise gate as one tail crushed its remnants, enhancing the tail beast's fury and inspiring the observer to emerge from hiding. A voice said, Enough! What brings something as curious as a 5-tailed 9 beast to a realm where tailed beasts are not even meant to exist? Cutting through the clamor, the erstwhile 9 beast turned its head to look at the idiot who had interrupted its fury. It was considerably taller than the examples it knew, and it appeared to be human. The human was elderly, with curled snow-white hair ringing its head, sharp lines running across its face, and a bare and furrowed top. The traveler's clothing was worn brown and frequently repaired, and the once fair skin had been exposed to the sun's rays for decades at least. The ancient monster was still bothered by 2 things. A tree branch, black as the abyss save for a handle where the bark had been scraped away to show white wood beneath, was slung to the mortal's back like a sword. The most unsettling aspect of this wood was its length, which was almost as long as a human's height and covered in thorns that appeared to grow and shrink in response to its sight. Then there were the eyes. This small creature met the demon's gaze without displaying any signs of fear or haughtiness. I thought I had come here to reflect on past failures. Instead, I find a new heading. Where is your container? Asked the visitor. Kakaka, you are brave mortal to make demands of one of the 9. Your question will remain unanswered, though I will devour you for your impudence before hunting the vixen. Tell me your name. The demon with 5 tails chuckled. Your container is female, interesting. That will make the search simpler. Will you surrender to sealing or must we desecrate this ground further? Inquired the intruder. Nine Beast cackled. You are a fool after all, you shall burn in my belly for a millennium. In reaction, the stranger reached back to release the staff, which was now exposed as a crook. He remarked, So be it. All I have is a pickle jar, I hope you find the odor bearable, before assuming a stance. She woke up without an alarm. Hangover or not, she woke up on time. Although her friend Midarashi was not a morning person, the pounding in her head was enough to motivate her to complete her morning routines, and since she hadn't set an alarm, she knew she had nothing urgent to do this morning. The cool air hitting her face as she got out of bed brought her senses even more into focus. It had been years since she had purchased proper nightwear, so she wore only a comfortable bra and a panty to bed. She groggily navigated the cluttered room, avoiding the trap triggers concealed by the clutter, and made her way to her bathroom without much trouble. Hair of the dog that bit me, pondered Nuda's friend as she lifted the lid of her toilet tank to grab the bottle she kept there after disarming the explosive trap that was the only danger in the restroom. Personal hygiene quickly became a secondary concern for shinobi who work in the field, who forego almost all the comforts that civilians take for granted. This was true not only on wilderness missions where facilities are inaccessible, but also in the middle of civilization, where one cannot afford the temporary weakness of a bath or shower. When a field shinobi could afford to clean themselves, their routine consisted of washing their face and appendages and applying deodorant. Because of this, when shinobi were off duty, they typically took care of themselves in one of two ways. Either they took advantage of the opportunity to truly enjoy the advantages of hot running water and related products, knowing that they might soon run out of them, or others, like Nuda friend, who was uncomfortable with the field set never fully leaving, did it and got it over with. So, quickly, Nuda's friend was cleaned, dressed, and headed to the mission office. Although she had no prior business to attend to, she felt that she was due for some action, and unlike Mato Guy and some other ranking shinobi, she wasn't exactly a workaholic, but to be honest, she didn't have much to do outside of work. Although there were constantly assignments available, she was not interested in anything below a B rank. While such employment would cover her expenses, a bored Nuda buddy was not a suitable customer. After a few minutes of walking down one of the main thoroughfares, Nuda's friend noticed someone following her. Perhaps it was the lovely day, or maybe the after-effects of her hangover made acceleration seem unappealing, but for some reason she chose to walk the distance from her flat to the tower rather than jump the rooftops. At one point, someone's focus shifted from casually studying her activities to a fractured but steady surveillance. Though she couldn't pinpoint the precise moment, she could figure it out in a matter of minutes. Nuda friend frowned inwardly while maintaining a disinterested and grumpy expression. Being shadowed was nothing new to her. After all, in a village of shinobi, it was practically policy to have the shinobi watch shinobi to ensure the headmaster's rule was secure. The policy had been relaxed at times, but the Uchiha massacre had made it clear why the policy existed in the first place. Naturally, because of her suspected loyalty, Nuda friend had come to expect more than her fair share of scrutiny, not that she liked it. However, this was incorrect. She had picked up on the tale much too quickly, and while she had no idea who was following her, it was definitely not a Yomi, an ANBU, or even a ninja training. This may have been someone who wanted to know she was being followed, but it just felt sloppy. As she turned onto a side street, Nuda friend disappeared, replacing herself with a bunshin. Okay, so I'm being stalked by someone who only has a vague idea of what they're doing. A villager then? Bastards always had it in for me. What, he thinks he can catch me at something a shinobi couldn't? Or is he just looking at me? I'm being stalked by a pervert, she muttered. Well, Mr. Happy, meet misplaced aggression, she said. Neru, who had observed the purple-haired woman earlier and chose to investigate, smiled at the convenient hiding place as she peered around the corner enough for one eye to monitor her. It was obvious that her shinobi skills were getting better because the woman had no idea. With a single tug to her shirt collar, Neru's false sense of dignity was completely destroyed, and she wailed in outrage, kicking at the air and reaching for the hand that was keeping her up. A stern female voice demanded, "Do I know you, brat?" Neru grabbed the arm that held her and managed to turn around, finding herself facing the purple-haired woman. Her friend had not intended for the question to be taken seriously, primarily because she was uninterested in the answer, but her recognition flared when she noticed the marks on the girl's cheeks. The girl yelled in Nuda's friend's face, "I'm Uzumaki Neru, put me down, crazy lady!" Nuda's friend's face broke into a smile as she let go of Neru and let her land on her ass on the sidewalk. Neru rubbed her stinging butt and yelled, "Oh! Why'd you do that?" The Nuda friend retorted, "Just granting your request, brat. Why are you following me?" Crossing her arms, Neru said, "You saved me from those guys." "And?" the Nuda friend asked, leaving it open-ended. "Usually it's the masked man that helps me," Neru added, cocking her head. Nuda Buddy wrinkled her eyebrow and said, "If you're trying to thank me, then why are you stalking me?" Neru chirped, beaming widely, "I'm practicing my mad shinobi skills." His smile quickly faded to a frown as his Nuda companion started laughing. "Skills? Brat, never mind that you're too young to even make the academy, but I have meat drunks with more stealth. You think with how small you are you could pass under the radar with ease," my Nuda buddy said. "I'm not small!" Neru screamed, but as her Nuda companion slapped her on the head with her foot, leaving the leg sitting on the girl's scalp, her rage gave way to pain and bewilderment. As the blonde grasped her ankle in a vain attempt to shove the foot off her head, Nuda's buddy smiled sadistically and said, "I have to disagree since you can easily be stepped on like a little bug." Neru said, "Get your stinky feet off me, crazy lady!" Grinding her foot on the oily hair, Nuda's friend shot back, "Stop calling me crazy! And who are you calling smelly? When was the last time you even bathed?" The snake mistress perspired as the blonde actually paused her struggles to adopt a contemplative stance in response to a rhetorical question. "The day before yesterday," responded Neru with assurance. "Really, guess I'll have to wash this sandal," said Nuda's friend with a smile. Suddenly, she lifted her foot free, and Neru dropped to the ground again. Neru yelled, "Crazy lady! Stop knocking me down!" with a red face. A friend of Nuda said, "You're the one who can't stay on your own 2 feet, klutz," and turned to go. "Well, at least I'm not crazy!" Neru yelled at her retreating buddy, who paused and growled under her breath without looking back. "Brat, this has stopped being fun, call me crazy one more time." The warning was left unspoken by the friend. Neru put her hands on her hips and asked, "Or what, crazy lady?" A little while later, he decided that a minimalist approach might be best and let a single shuriken fly, severing the rope that held Neru to the tree. The girl squealed as she fell the few centimeters that kept her off the ground, landing among the clumps of grass she had vainly torn up with her free hands. The observing ANBU was a little confused about what to do, but he supposed he should do something even though the situation really did not fall under the guidelines for intervention. The ANBU was somewhat impressed by how quickly she freed herself now that she was upright, and without even bothering to dust herself off, the blonde stomped from the spot, barely catching the words, "crazy lady," as they were carried on the wind. She was apparently unharmed as she promptly set about freeing her ankles from the knots tied in them. Similar to her alarm clock, Nuda's friend discovered that her stalker had become a part of her everyday routine and that, as far as she could tell, there was no logical explanation, so she gave up trying to find one. For some reason, the brat wanted to irritate her, so she would keep leaving the girl hanging until something else caught her distracted. The child was improving. It was still not good enough to go unnoticed, but it was better than the first time. Every time there was a confrontation, it inevitably turned into a pointless quarrel that resulted in the girl being tied to a tree by Naruto's friend. The brat was protected by the sandaime, so the last thing she needed was to cross a line with the headmaster. She could have gone to him and asked what would cause trouble and what was acceptable, but that seemed unsporting. Normally, if something like this happened, she would just add the fear of the kami to the issue and move on. Her interactions with the girl, however, provided an interesting diversion if she were more honest, at least with herself, since her sole social activity outside of boxing was the occasional drink with Kurenai. But Naruto had other plans for her leisure time, so she had traveled across the town via rooftop today to avoid annoying blondes. Yes, she had decided that today was ideal for a trip to the hot springs, and she was not a fan of taking public baths. Moments like these are what makes life worth living, Naruto's friend thought to herself. She could have sighed, but she didn't because she was well hidden in her hiding place, giving her a nice view of the hot springs patrons in all their glory. She took a sip from the small sake bottle she was holding in her left hand and quietly drank the beverage she considered to be heavenly. Even though spying required stealth, especially when your marks were seasoned shinobi, but for Naruto's friend, the superior viewing pleasure that training produced was worth the extra effort. A high-pitched voice exclaimed, "Gotcha!" and a poke to the Kanuchi's back followed, both of which made her spray sake as she bounded to her feet and spun around to face the poker. To her surprise and ire, one orange-clad Uzumaki Naru was sitting down among the ornamental shrubbery, smiling like a fox. "You little dash!" Naru's companion started yelling and seizing her by a dress strap, but she stopped suddenly when someone coughed and remembered that she was an intruder. The men in and around the hot spring were observing her with some enjoyment and some perplexity. One inquired, raising his sunglasses up from his eyes as if to affirm, "Mitarashi?" The Naruto buddy answered the unasked questions as dignifiedly as she could. After exclaiming, "You're by," the Naruto companion fled in a whirlpool of leaves, bringing Naru along. One ninja in training questioned uncertainly, "Was a woman peeping on us?" A man with dark hair and thick eyebrows interjected, "Most unyouthful," from the water. Her pal Naruto threw Naru into a neighboring tree, her face still as red as an apple. As she collapsed to the tree's base, the girl yelled, "Oh! What did you do that for?" When Naruto's companion yelled, "You stupid brat! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Naru sank under the words and remained still, staring at her feet. "It was playing tag," she said. "Do you think I've been tying you to trees as a term of endearment? You're annoying. And you just made me look like some stupid pervert." Naruto's friend spat, but Naru remained silent and continued to look down, making it impossible for Naruto to see the blonde's eyes moistening. When the blonde calmed down, Naruto's friend made a sound of exasperation and waved her hand dismissively. "Get out of here, brat," Naruto's friend said. The girl initially fled silently, but as soon as she was some distance away from the woman, she fled. That evening, Naruto's friend noticed that she was craving a little more sake than normal, and she wasn't sure why. After 2 weeks, Kurenai, in particular, had been annoyed, something about not making things any easier for women seriously pursuing careers as respectable shinobi, her usual crap, to put it mildly. Naruto's friend was grateful for a B-rank assassination mission. Despite enjoying her work, she needed to leave the village for a while. The hot spring incident had given her peers plenty of material for ridicule. In any case, the Naruto friend had been gone for more than a month and was reverting to her leisure activities. The snake mistress was depressed despite having performed admirably on her mission and having a fat wad of Rio to spend on anything she wanted. The dampener had been following her for a while, and she wasn't sure what else to call it because her education outside of work-related fields wasn't exactly stellar. She had resolved to let others think what they want, which would have been a more noble idea if it hadn't been true in this instance. Prior to the mission, she had assumed it was because she had lost what was left of her reputation. She truly realized the answer while she was strolling in the middle of the day to her favorite dango spot, with no one following her. "Shit," said a nerdy buddy to the general public. A civilian woman gave the Kunuchi a shady look for using such a word in public. Mitarashi Nuda's friend, the snake mistress and rejected apprentice of the Sannin trader, felt bad for screaming at a brat. She wished Civi had come up with a better word to describe how wrong this situation was. Nudu friend thought she had more than enough problems to deal with than worrying about the feelings of some brat. She came to the conclusion that there was no other option than to find the brat and make her accept an apology in order to get this monkey off her back. She was trained in the art of silent tracking and assassinations, so this child should be no problem. She might be able to find Yamanaka's right now, but that doesn't mean anything. She was seriously considering asking for directions, but that doesn't mean she needed help. Others might have a hard time finding a single snot-nosed brat in the kingdom that is Leaf Village, but those people weren't Nerda friend Mitarashi. It was at the edge of what passed for slums in the village, populated by wage workers, day laborers, and poor old folks. It was not exactly the trader's district, but it would do in a pinch. At last, she located the apartment building that was supposed to house the blonde brat, and to be honest, she had seen far worse and much better. The timing Kami appeared to be working in her favor because as her friend Nuda watched the building from a ledge, her target appeared. The girl was difficult to miss because, despite her hair, she was wearing an orange dress. Who told this brat that orange was a respectable color? The snake mistress was about to jump down and apologize to the girl when a smile split her face. In one powerful stroke of justice, vengeance and a guilty conscience would be satisfied, as Nuda friend muttered to herself. After all that harassment, I deserve a little payback. She would shadow the girl for a while, show the brat some real mad shinobi skills, and then reveal herself at the least suitable moment for the brat. The subconscious operated in a peculiar manner. Headmaster Tower 3 days later. A friend of Nerda had spent 3 days observing Nera's daily routine. She wasn't sure what to anticipate, but what she discovered made her nervous. As the headmaster's secretary waved her inside the ruler's office, Nerda's friend questioned, "What exactly am I doing here?" "Ah, Nerda friend, I was surprised at your request for an audience. You're not due for another high-ranking mission for a few days yet, or perhaps you want a C rank?" the elderly man asked, turning to face her with a fatherly smile. He had been standing next to his large desk with a view of the village. "Headmaster Sama, I may as well nap the day away for all the thrill a C rank would bring. Besides which, I wouldn't want to deny the cute genin their chances at losing their blood virginity," my Nerda companion said. The Sandame smoked his pipe and asked, "Well, if you are not here for business, what can I do for you?" "Ah, yes, well. You see, sir, I have been." Nerda's buddy chastised herself for not practicing this line. The elderly man asked in a kind manner, "Something to do with Nero?" Nerda's buddy nearly lost her breath, but she controlled her expression. "He's the fucking headmaster, so of course he would know." The headmaster told her, "The A&B kept me well informed of yours and Nera's interactions. I am very pleased you exercise such restraint, you really have come a long way." As his thoughts turned to a younger Nerda friend who had been released from custody with part of her memory gone and an instant pariah. She had been so full of pain and hatred that he would not have been shocked if she had gone missing in order to exact revenge and avoid the village's condemnation. The words of Nerda Buddy drew the god of shinobi back to the present, and it was a cruel irony that, most likely, the only reason she had not deserted was because she did not want to follow her sensei's path in any manner. "I have been watching her," the Nerda Buddy confessed. The Sandame grinned at her innocently childish look. it was consoling to know that the ruthless murderers under his leadership could still have such human qualities, and in fact, it was why he was more likely to put up with their strange conduct. "And?" he asked his pal Naruto. "It's no good," a buddy of Naruto said. The Sandaime sat down at the desk and said, "I see, has someone harmed her?" However, she couldn't help but think of how those casual acquaintances had abandoned her when she most needed support. "Nobody touches her, that's the problem. When she doesn't get to see you, Headmaster Sama, she goes to a ramen stand for a while then just wanders around. Even I at least hung around with other kids. She hears insults more than anything," Naruto's friend found herself saying. Sarutobi Hiruzen insisted. "What is your point? If something isn't done, you're going to have a psychotic container on your hands," a friend of Naruto said. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, and he asked in a steel voice, "What would you have me do?" Naruto's companion took a half step back, suddenly self-conscious. "If a mob were foolish enough to form, demanding her blood, the ANBU would reduce them to bloody ribbons. It was only bizarre circumstance that made your own intervention necessary. But this is not IWA. I cannot tell the people how to behave within the bounds of the law. If the merchants cheat her and the people shun her, there is nothing I can do without losing credibility." The Sandaime stated what she ought to have understood. "Even if she isn't injured, nothing good will come of her living alone and isolated like this. Isn't there somewhere you can put her?" a friend of Naruto asked gently. "The very night I revealed the force's final act, several clans offered to adopt her into their ranks," said the headmaster. "But in the end her adoption would have been a matter of politics. The Uchiha and Hyuga seeing her as a means to increase their power, and most holding a similar motivation to some degree. And there were those who believed she should be put to death. Danzo actually requested her being raised in his root program," Sarutobi explained. Naruto's friend winced at that last one. She had encountered the one-eyed elder's agents. He seemed to take the Nidaime's worldview a few kilometers. "Others, like the Aburame, seemed sincere, but in the end politics prevailed. As headmaster, my duty is to protect the leaf, and that includes maintaining internal stability. The Uchiha-Hyuga rivalry made the situation worse back then, and now the Hyuga would see any other clan taking her in as a challenge to their dominance." He lowered his head and continued to face the window. "The civilians are out of the question. Their fear is strengthened by ignorance. They view Nero as the Nine Beasts reborn, and treat her as such. Many times civilian families have inquired about adopting her, only to prove hostile under investigation. Even with those who are not malicious, I doubt any of them could provide the security she would need growing up amongst such a hostile community. As for shinobi, outside the clans, in all this time only one shinobi has offered to adopt her and proven pure in his intentions. However, I denied his request," concluded Sarutobi. It was difficult to think that any earnest applicant would not have been an upgrade, so when her buddy inquired, "Anyone I know?" she scowled. "It was Mato Guy," the Hodgkins replied. In an attempt to remember what she could about the man, Naruto's friend asked, "Who? Oh, that eyebrow guy that yells about youth? What was wrong with him?" She remembered that he liked green and that she had once seen him carrying a boulder on his back, but she was unable to recall the Sandaime's initial, hushed response, which involved something about green monsters and not needing any more. Her focus was brought back to the present when her companion asked, "I am sorry, what?" "Ah, well, you see, in addition to taking many missions, his style calls for an intense and time-consuming training regimen. As such, he would not really have the time to fill the role of a single father without neglecting his duties. A most regrettable fact," the headmaster stated while massaging his beard. "So, that is the best you can do?" sighed Naruto Buddy, and the elder shinobi gave her a sympathetic, world-weary look. "Ruling is not like completing a mission. Often it is impossible to tell if you have succeeded or failed. Sarutobi informed her. Shortly after, the snake mistress excused herself, thanking him for his time, and leaving less spirited than she had arrived. The headmaster would take some time to think about the meeting before returning to his paperwork. With her legs hanging over the end of her apartment building, Neru sat on the top of the ledge. She enjoyed watching the twilight unfold as the sun began to drop. She enjoyed keeping an eye on a number of locations throughout the village. Several perspectives of the city, but she had not yet discovered anything that anyone who knew her would remark on how at this point she could call the best spot. She seemed unusually calm and concentrated during this time. The Naruto friend crouching just behind Nara said, "Hey brat," to which the girl was. To say that Naruto buddy was shocked would be an understatement. He couldn't help but smile as the little blonde literally appeared out of nowhere. The girl's new footing was a little off, so she flailed wildly to avoid falling until Naruto's friend grabbed her orange shirt backwards and prevented her from getting hurt, also known as falling on her ass. However, she didn't stay down. Instead, she whirled on the purple-haired woman, meeting her at eye level with an enraged gaze. Nara cried out, "Crazy lady, are you trying to kill me?" Meanwhile, her friend's smile vanished as she realized why she was here, and her mind finally seemed to take over, causing her to deflate. "Brah! Naru," Naruto's friend found herself saying. Nara squinted at the second word because Naruto's friend had never used her own name. They remained there for a minute or so without saying anything. At last, Nara demanded, "What?" Naruto's companion yelled, "Shut up, Brad, I'm trying to apologize for the other day." Took a step back and then scowled. Nara remarked, perplexed, "You're apologizing?" Nara's mouth dropped agape as her Naruto buddy remarked, "Yep, glad that's over," getting to her feet. Before her face became gloomy. "Wait a sec, you didn't really apologize. That doesn't count." Naru was shaking her fist at her pal Naruto. Naruto's buddy shrugged and said, "Well, since it was half your fault, I only need to make a half-assed apology, so that should be good enough." Naru crossed her arms, frowned, and then glanced up at Naruto's friend sternly. "You suck," she remarked bluntly, and the deadpan made my Naruto friend shout with glee. Proclamation and extended his hand to tousle the girl's hair. Now, brat, keep the insults up and I might not buy you dinner," pal Naruto said. Reprimanded. "What?" Nara gasped, continuing to push the hand of her Naruto buddy away from her head. Have you ever experienced a day where your family, job, or really you've been so exhausted by everything that when you finally arrive at the refuge of your quarters, all you want to do is go to bed, and the rest will remove you from the weariness that permeates your entire being? Forget about eating, taking a bath isn't even taken into account, and even switching out your existing outfit is disregarded as something for later. Really, the only things that count are you and bed. Finding that the highly desired piece of furniture has been replaced by a board covered in sharp metal spikes, Nara's expression was appropriate as she gazed at her plate, seemingly both angry at what was on it and attempting to change reality by sheer willpower to take the aforementioned food items off of it. Pleading, "I wanted ramen," Nara said. "Well, you're getting dango," said a buddy of Naruto from the other side of the table. We're seated at a corner table at Naruto's friend's preferred dango spot, which actually provided a variety of foods. It was more quieter than one may anticipate. Considering how many people were there, the musician who played on his strings, the instrument lowered the talk to a background hum. I guess it was somewhat to be expected, but this establishment boldly served shinobi of the leaf, with boisterous shinobi being the exception to the authority. Granted, in Konoha, such fact might be mistaken for the actions of many of its renowned shinobi. In any case, the majority regarded the institution as a peaceful setting and left their boisterous behavior to those establishments that were quiet, open to such antics. The typical culprit for disrupting the calm was Naruto's friend, and tonight she attracted even more attention when she had a guest. Murmuring, "Dango's disgusting," Naru said. "I'm buying so I decide what to get," a cheerful, softly bonking Naruto replied. Naru patted the area and moved the dango-laden plate away after striking the girl on the head with the spent dango stick. "You ought to apologize and give me what I want rather than what you want," whimpered Naru. "Well, I never claimed to be adept at saying sorry. Now eat, it's illegal to." While consuming another skewer, Naruto's friend remarked, "Let good dango sit like that." Naru shook her head. "No, it's yucky," she said. "Let me tell you that dango is a gift from the kami. I challenge you to take one bite and tell me otherwise." The Naruto buddy frowned, but she secretly smiled as the brat struck the young girl as the sort as she picked up a dango skewer. Who could turn down a challenge? Naru's smile vanished as she exposed her teeth and managed to rip a single grain of rice into her mouth from the ball, following a display of chewing. With a disgusted expression, she stuck out her tongue at the grain. Naruto buddy screamed, running up. "Oh no you don't! There is no way you even tasted that!" The young girl kept blowing a raspberry at her, and she got up from her chair. Naru said, "I don't have to taste poop to know it's yucky." A chill fell over the eatery, and Naru soon discovered she had crossed a line. You may make fun of your Mitarashi Naruto pal by doing so. Valuable snakes, defile her mother's tomb, and even make fun of her few pals. Usually, she would merely dismiss it with a grin and covertly plan revenge and forget before acting. However, no one made fun of Dango's precious in front of her without consequence. A little while later, the source of her problem lay between two orange covers and was now, as always, being shamelessly held by the notorious copy Nin. Yuhi Kurenai was not in the best of moods. She had somehow acquired sixth head master for evening conversation, and that always annoyed her. It wasn't his man a few words approach to conversation, or even his air of casual disinterest in most everything. It was not unusual to arrive in the middle of the self-proclaimed snake mistress causing a disturbance, but the sight that greeted the highly skilled ninja and elite ninja training gave both of them pause, quite the accomplishment considering their experiences as shinobi, because she was too preoccupied with her prim and proper thoughts to notice that they were going to eat at one of Naruto's friends' hangouts. Kurenai, despite her long association with the borderline insane snake mistress, was stunned by the strangeness. The sixth head master, however, simply gave one of his signature eye smiles after taking in the situation. A friend of Naruto stood over her usual table, pinning a poor girl to it as she apparently forced a skewer of dango down the poor child's throat. The sixth head master said, "I must say when the priests talk about combating hunger I never thought it would turn out so literal." Before turning back to the porn, Kurenai was a little concerned that her friend might have pulled something, but she straightened up and turned to face her friend and superior, scratching the back of her head. Apparently the other patrons did not register as a legitimate audience, so she felt self-conscious for once. Naru then attempted to remove the skewer that had been rammed down her esophagus. The sixth head master only looked up languidly from his book, seemingly taking the situation in stride. "She insulted the dango," Nerda friend said in response to the unasked question. Karina's eye twitched, and she tried to be patient and the bigger person, but Nerda friend simply had to maintain the second purest impulse control in the leaf. The elite, highly skilled ninja said, I didn't realize you two were so close. Never thought a day would when Mitarashi Nerda friend would willfully share her dango. Nerda friend paled, realizing that she had indeed wasted some of her precious on an unenlightened culinary heathen, but the implication she noticed a second later was far worse, so Nerda friend went to her default. Taking the still choking Nara by the hair, Nerda buddy said, Bye, and disappeared in a whirlpool of leaves. Karina was asked absently, So am I buying? By the sixth headmaster. The apartment building in Naru. Ah! Naru squeaked as her hair threw her up into the air and she landed on her rump. Being unable to stay down, she got up quickly and rubbed her severely abused posterior while glaring at the chief offender. Her friend was quickly regaining what passed as her composure, grinning amusingly in response to the girl's glare, which only seemed to aggravate the child more. When her nerda buddy said, Well, now we're square, Naru stopped glaring and blinked in perplexity. But then she realized what she was doing and stomped forward, pointing accusingly at the purple-haired woman. When Nerda friend yawned and took a skewer of dango out of her jacket, Nara screamed, No! You almost killed me with your yucky dango! That doesn't count all! Nara jumped back, raising her arms defensively, but she almost got blamed when Nerda friend started eating the meal casually. When Nerda's friend said, Well, either way, good night, brat, Naru turned to see her apartment building for the first time. Neat, Naru remarked, amazed at how far the spirit art had apparently carried them. Turning around, she saw her friend Nerda already leaving, and after a moment of hesitation, she leaped up and yelled. Crazy lady! Exclaimed Naru, causing her buddy to pause and turn her head while continuing to eat her post-dinner snack. Nara muttered, Even though you're crazy, I'm glad you're back. His pal simply flicked the expended skewer at him before disappearing once more in a whirl of leaves.